Good morning, everyone. Today we'll go on talking about the inter-allied negotiations from 1941 to 1945. Last class, we talked about three conferences, right? They were, firstly, Atlantic Conference. It was between Roosevelt and Churchill. Secondly, the Moscow Conference. All the representatives of the Big Three, they were part of it. And then we talk about the Cairo Conference, right? So it's a time when Chiang Kai-shek met Roosevelt and Churchill. So you may recognize now that actually for the Big Three, who were Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill, they didn't really meet each other in the wartime conference until the Cairo Conference, right? So today we're going to start the conference that first time in history that the Big Three, they meet each other. That was the Tehran Conference. You can see this is a picture from the Tehran Conference. So it was on 1943 from November 28th to December the 1st, and it was in Tehran, and also the participants were the Big Three. So this is the first time when they meet each other to discuss about different topics. For example, the arrangement for the post-war Europe, the future organization of UN, and the fate of Germany. So the most important part for the Tehran Conference is at this time when Stalin, they made it very clear that he would claim all the territories which USSR had annexed in Poland and Baltic in 1939 to 1940, and that Poland would be compensated with German territory. That means they want like all the countries in Baltic. Baltic actually already include all those Eastern Europe countries and also Poland under their sphere of influence. Surprisingly, to this requestment, there was no opposition from Churchill or Roosevelt. But it was all because they were having a more important decision to make. That is, the plan for the D-Day. Because as we all know, D-Day is like in 1943 in June, right? So at this stage, they are planning on their counterattack. This is an excerpt from the book Alliance. Let's read together. On 29th November, Roosevelt told his son Elliot, who accompanied him to Tehran, that our chiefs of staffs are convinced of one thing. The way to kill the most Germans with the least loss of American soldiers is to mount one great big invasion and then slam them with everything we have got. So here, one great big invasion actually indicates the D-Day, right? It makes sense to me. It makes sense to Uncle Joe. It's the quickest way to win the war. That means if they fight together, of course, there's more chances for them to win the war. So that's all. Trouble is the PM, means Churchill, is thinking too much of the post-war, and where England will be, he's scared of letting the Russians get too strong in Europe. Whether that's bad depends on a lot of factors. Here, from this dialogue, we may see that, to Roosevelt, the most important thing was to end the war, not the post-war arrangement. So, even though Churchill, he didn't really want to agree with Stalin's proposal, but because they tried to form together to fight Germany to start the Great D-Day, that is the reason why he has to accept the fact that Stalin is expanding his influence in Eastern European countries. So, in Tehran Conference, it has gave way to Stalin to expand their influence in Eastern Europe, which laid the foundation of the Cold War. With the success of D-Day and their unstoppable counterattack, the Second World War has almost come to an end. So, they arranged the Yalta Conference. So these are some basic information for Yalta Conference. First in February 1945 in Yalta, USSR, and then still the Big Three, right? But in this conference, besides creating plans for finishing the war in Europe and Eastern Asia, it also attempted to lay the foundation of the coming peace. Plans were finalized for the occupation of Germany by the victory powers. So the two aims for the conference: firstly, draw up plans after the Second World War for Europe, for example, Germany, Poland, other liberated nations, and Far East, that is in Asia, and lay the foundations of the coming peace. So firstly, for Germany and its capital Berlin would be divided into 4 zones and occupied by US, Britain, France, and USSR respectively. My first question is, why Berlin need to divide it into 4 zones while Germany has already divided into 4 zones? It is because Berlin was the capital of Germany. So as the political center, Britain, France, or US, they don't want Soviet Union to dominate it. So it was agreed that Berlin itself would also be divided into 4 zones. So instead of letting Soviet Union control Berlin alone, the Allied Control Council was established for them to rule Berlin together. So my next question is, why US also want to occupy a part of Germany and a part of Berlin? Because for Britain, France, USSR, at least they are located in Europe continent, right? But US, firstly, they live in another continent. It's not really convenient for them to have a zone here. It's not a very huge place for them. So do you think it was US who want to stay, or the other Allied powers want US to stay? Actually, at the first stage of the conference, US, they don't really want a part of Germany or part of Berlin. They want these European countries, the European powers, to have this place. But Churchill really want US to stay. So why do you think Churchill, Britain, the Prime Minister of Britain, he want US to stay? It was because they want US support, right? Because at that time, since USSR has become one of the superpowers, after the Second World War, we have 2 superpowers. One is US, one is USSR, right? So Britain, they want US to be there, so USSR, they were not able to dominate their power in Germany. And Germany had to be disarmed and denazified. All war criminals had to be prosecuted. In the Yalta Conference, the most controversial discussion was on Poland and other Eastern European countries. Actually, they already talked about Poland in Tehran Conference, right? Stalin claimed that all the territories which the USSR had annexed in Poland and Baltic in 1939 to 1940, all under their sphere of influence, right? And also, in the Tehran Conference, Roosevelt and Churchill has already agreed with that. But if you review the discussion in Yalta Conference, you will find that actually some of them has changed their attitude. Of course, it's not Stalin because he always want that place, right? So let's see. Firstly, in the Yalta Conference, Stalin said, we suffered a lot in this war because the casualties of USSR are actually more than all other countries combined, right? They have to suffer huge casualties. I think we deserve some lands because our loss. So how about move our border westward into Poland and that Poland to have some of the Germany's territory? So for Churchill, since he thinks we already agree you in the Tehran Conference, so even though, of course, he don't want to do it, but actually after the Tehran Conference, the Red Army, that is the army for the USSR, had already controlled Poland and Eastern Germany. Then he said yes. For Roosevelt, he said, this is actually not acceptable. It's not fair for Poland or for Germany, right? Then Stalin, he said, if I have Poland, I will leave Greece alone. So actually, at that time, Stalin has already expanded their sphere of influence to a lot of Eastern European countries, for example, Poland and Eastern Germany. As we all knew, Greece is just next to Germany and also located in the Balkan Peninsula, right? So this is the time when Greece, they're starting their civil war. The Greece civil war was actually between the Communist Party, which under the support of Stalin and USSR versus the Democratic Party in Greece. So actually Stalin has already started to expand their influence in Greece. So Stalin here, he said, okay, I will leave Greece alone. I won't go on supporting them. I will cut my support. So in return, he think maybe we should pass this proposal, right? So Churchill here, he think firstly, we already agreed him into wrong conference, right? We need to keep our promise. And secondly, since Britain has a very close relationship with Greece, that's the reason why he think at least we can stop the spread of communism in Greece, right? They already have Poland and Eastern Germany, so let him have it. And last, Roosevelt very unwillingly, but still, he said, okay. So from this conversation, it's obvious that Roosevelt has changed his attitude, right? In the wrong conference, he had thought Churchill was so annoying by talking about the postal arrangement and preventing Stalin from expanding to Eastern Europe. But now he took Churchill's role. And also, it's obvious that it was already too late, since Stalin's army has already controlled Poland and the Eastern Germany. So, for Poland and other Eastern European countries, as Stalin wished, the eastern part of Poland would be given to USSR. Poland would get some territories of Germany in the north and west as compensation. So here, one question is, for USSR, they said they're not invading Poland. Actually, what they did is liberating Poland, liberate the people, right? Because they used to under the German control. So now they're helping them to reform and reconstruct their country. So we're going to find out how this arrangement can shadow the Cold War. So the liberated nations and the protectorates of the Axis powers would receive help in establishing the democratic government. Firstly, what does protectorates mean? It means a state that is controlled or protected by another. So you can see at that time, a lot of Eastern European countries actually already under the protectorates of Germany, right? So now they will receive help from the Allied powers to help them to establish the democratic government. So USSR, actually, they are helping Poland to build a democratic government. So the problem is not about liberation. It's about what is a democratic government. So here we have the big threes, right? So what do you think their definition on democratic government? I will give you two options. A government dominated by the Communist Party. B, a government that is not dominated by the Communist Party. So for Stalin, of course, he's the leader of the first communist state. So for him, actually, a democratic government is a government that dominates by the Communist Party. But for these two people, of course, for them, they were trying to have a capitalist country, right, with representative government, right? So since they have different definition on democratic government, and since here, when they discuss about democratic government, they didn't really have a strict rule on what kind of democratic government they were forming. This is the time when they give way to Stalin to further expand his power. As a result, Stalin built communist governments in these liberated countries and satellite states. So this is a writing from Churchill to Roosevelt shortly after the Yalta Conference. The Soviet Union has become a danger to the free world. A new front must be created against her onward sweep. The front should be as far east as possible. A settlement must be reached on all major issues between West and East in Europe before the armies of democracy melt. So you can see actually Churchill has already sensing the threat from Stalin and also from his aggressions in Eastern Europe. So also for Japan had to return the territories it has seized from the USSR and give its privileges on northeast China and outer Mongolia. Remember, in which conference they talk about the arrangement of Japan? The Cairo Conference, when they invited Chiang Kai-shek and his wife Song Mei-lin, right? So let's get back to here. Conclusions on how did Yalta Conference shadow the Cold War. Firstly, superficially, this seemed to be a success for the British and Americans because firstly, Germany was divided into 4 zones. No one is really dominating the Europe, and also secondly, they decide to form the peacekeeping organization UN. But in fact, the terms were so vague that Stalin could easily manipulate them. In what way? Actually, I already talked about this just now, right? Firstly, the exact amount of land that Poland would receive at the cost of Germany was not fixed, because here he only proposed that it need to move the border westward, right? It didn't really mention move to where. So it also gave way for Stalin to do something, to expand more, right? And secondly, democracy meant very different things to Stalin on one side and Churchill and Roosevelt on the other side. For the former, it essentially meant the domination of the Communist Party for Stalin. For the latter, it meant effectively the domination of the non-communist parties. So, in the words of the US Chief of Staff, the Soviets could stretch the agreement all the way from Yalta to Washington without ever technically breaking it. That means without breaking any terms they signed in the conference, Stalin has already have many ways and have a large space for him to achieve his goals. So this is an American cartoon appeared shortly after the Yalta Conference. You can see in the conference, Stalin has expanding the influence, getting all his interests from Europe, right? So both Churchill and Roosevelt had sensing the expansion and aggression of Stalin.